Hi, everyone. Hi, thank you so much for being here today. I just want to give a shout out to Frankie and the whole Open Book Festival team for organizing this panel and the whole festival. It's not easy to get writers to come out of their little hovels. It does help if you tell them that they get to talk about themselves. But still no small feat, so thanks very much for that. My name is Keely, and I'm joined here by three incredible writers to talk about three incredible books. I'm going to give a brief introduction of them, and then we'll get on to some questions. And if you guys have any burning questions, then in the last 15 minutes, we'll send the microphone around and see what you have to say. So firstly, we've got In the Shadows, originally In die Shadows, by Olivia Coetzee. And this is like a queer horror noir mystery that's set in a sort of fictional community on the outskirts of Cape Town called The Shadows. It's a close-knit community, but a troubled one. There are a dozen or so characters, and each of them is navigating a serious trauma in their own way. The book tackles issues of drug addiction, homophobia, alcoholism, sexual abuse, gang violence, domestic violence, poverty, the inherited trauma of histories of dislocation and disenfranchisement. It's heavy, but it's The Shadows, so. And all this pain kind of accumulates to a point of rupture that I don't want to spoil too much, but half of the community kind of gets involved in a Christian death cult and starts terrorizing the young queer people in the community. But in the end, justice prevails, love prevails, and it's great. Yeah, definitely check this out. And Olivia has very kindly offered to give one copy away to a lucky member of the audience. We'll deal with that at the end. Thank you, Olivia. Secondly, we have the Akashic Records of the Last People, as written by Nico, by Tanya Meeson. This is a very exciting book. It's set very far in the future, post-climate apocalypse, post-earthquakes that have split the continents apart, post an asteroid storm that has brought a second moon into Earth's orbit and has therefore risen the tides of all of the oceans. And it takes place on an island called Mitpar, where a few thousand people have been living for hundreds and hundreds of years. And because the sea levels are so high, they haven't left the island, and they're struggling a little bit to survive. And the book is narrated by, or written as a framing device, by Nico, who's the son in a long lineage of high priestesses. And before his mother died, his mother taught him how to read and write in the ancient language, which is English. In this world, stories are banned and writing is definitely banned. So this is kind of his like secret recording of how the last people survive and eventually how they leave the island. There's a spoiler, sorry. I wasn't going to do that, but I couldn't help myself. Yeah, very cool treatment of prose. Yeah, definitely check this out. And last but not least, we have Good Hope by Nick Clelland. And this novel imagines a world in which, in 2007, the Western Cape seceded from South Africa and is living as its own independent country, although a contested country, unsurprisingly. And it's called the Good Hope Territory, and it is beautiful and safe. But it's also buoyed up by this authoritarian regime, which is sort of inherited apartheid era racist political system, sort of American prison industrial complex security enforcement, and sort of neoliberal economic development at all costs. Dystopia. Yeah. Very wacky, very exciting. Quite a harrowing read, and for those of you who live in Cape Town, a lot of the little spots that the characters traffic will be very familiar, which makes it all the more scary to me because it makes it weirdly plausible. So that's Good Hope. Great. So with those introductions out of the way, I want to talk about kind of the three books together and what they share, even though they're all set in different times and they have diverse story structures, diverse characters. What I think that they share, and what the organizers of this panel seem to think that they share, was that each of these stories kind of takes stock of the present and sees elements of a dystopia, which is not some far-flung future, but something that's very much embedded in the fabric of reality. And they look at this dystopia squarely and ask, how do we survive this? How do we care for each other? How do we love each other? Where do we find justice, and how do we fight back? And in case you're wondering why I'm here, these are sort of some of the questions that I was thinking about in my first novel, which is called How to Build a Home for the End of the World. And this is a book about a father and a daughter who go on a road trip at the end of the world. And it was inspired by a road trip that I took with my father in 2017. And as we were driving across Route 66 and looking at these ghost towns and reservations and vast landscapes that were suffering from environmental destruction, and listening to Trump's inauguration on the radio because it was January, I was thinking that you could probably write a book that is as close to the grain of truth as possible and say it's happening at the end of the world and no one would bat an eye. So that was the inspiration for that book. And I wondered from each of the panelists here, did you have a similar moment like that? Or to put it more simply, what was the inspiration behind your book? Maybe we can start with Olivia.
So in 2015, David O'Lane was murdered in a little small town called Bella Vista because he's queer.
Mm-hmm.
He's gay. And they killed him because of that. I heard of the story and it inspired me. Not only that murder itself, but also all of the other murders that happens within, our communities, within the Lokshaws, where people are still just not accepting of, queer people.
Mm.
And so that's where the inspiration came from that story, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. More? Yeah, basically. And so, how the world was created was just from drawing from all of the different experiences that I've had throughout my life. I was actually shocked because one of the scenes where they are in the woods, it's area where I grew up, lots of tall trees and things like that. And I didn't realize it at the time while writing. And my sister, I asked her to just, take a read. And she was blown away that it took her to that area kind of thing. So it was for me just like pulling from all of the different experiences of my life, using David O'Lane's kind of, can I call it demise of homophobia,
right,
that inspired it, yeah.
Thank you.
The inspiration really is going to sound incredibly naff because it was a dream. It was a series of dreams. You have those dreams and you think at 2 o'clock in the morning when you wake up, this is going to make an amazing story. And then when you wake up at 9 o'clock, it just really isn't. But this one was. It was a very particular scene in the book where this group of people have gone out over the endless water plain. The waters have receded. They've gone out and now they have to run back to save their lives because the water's coming back. And I was very curious. There were two people, two men, and one didn't make it. And I became curious as to what the relationship was. I'm terrible at talking about my book without giving spoilers. I'm so sorry.
We're going to wipe your memories after this. Don't worry.
Yeah. It's very dystopian. So I just became very curious about the relationship between the two and about the environment, about how they found themselves in this environment. And like most story ideas, when you get one, there's a sort of gravitational force around it. So you'll find that quite a lot of your own thoughts and philosophies and ideas sort of start coalescing around this, little nub of an idea. And there were news pieces and things that had interested me. So, for example, the moon is moving away. Our moon is moving away by, I think, about 1 centimeter every year or something like that. And that was very interesting. And I needed to explain the tides. And so I spoke to astrophysicists and found ways of explaining how the tide would work. And so the inspiration was really that one image, that one dream, and then a different dream where there was a mountain. It sounds terribly naff. And then the kind of story built around that. So it's not very noble, but that was the inspiration for that. And just climate change, just catastrophe really and everything that's happening. Yeah. That's it.
Thank you.
Well, if yours is naff, then mine's a cliche, I suppose. The pandemic was, when it happened, when a lot of books came out of the pandemic, for me, I was actually working in politics in the pandemic. I was the advisor to the Premier, and we had to build hospitals and face death. And, it was dark, and it was traumatic, and it was bloody difficult. And I suppose writing became a coping mechanism, in a sense, to wake up very early and just write. And the world was so dark, I just went darker. That was my response. That's I suppose the kind of the trigger. But if I look at other inspirations, well, firstly, there was a political party that wanted Cape independence. I mean, the things in this book are not things that I've just made up. I may have pushed them, but there's a party that wants Cape independence. The DA wants what they call the devolution of power, right? So there are people who want these things. And then, on the other hand, because Cape independence is a context. The actual book is not about that. It's about, for your life to be better, what rights are you prepared to give up? So if you don't have a job, you don't have a house, what happens if I just take away your vote? Is that a good deal? And so I just was talking about the idea of the progressive realization of rights and the fact that government doesn't give us rights. And so if we get desperate, are we going to go to a situation where we'll forego those rights? And for me, that's dark in my own way.
Yeah. Thank you. And another thing that, another affinity that I guess I noticed reading the 3 texts in quick succession was a sense of entrapment. In the shadows, the characters often speak about the fact that they can't imagine life outside of the shadows, or that it's difficult to leave. Even though they can see Table Mountain from their windows, the city feels so estranged to them, and the entire world of the novel is kind of condensed in that one neighborhood. And Nick in Good Hope, there's a sense of, as you say, the characters kind of live in this paradise, but in order for that paradise to exist, they allow themselves to be monitored at all times, and there's a threat of exile and imprisonment and even death.
Being executed in time with the noonday gun.
Yes, exactly. That is kind of ever present. So maybe they can move freely within the Good Hope territory, but they're kind of trapped inside of it. And Tanya, the characters are literally stuck on the island of Midpar, and they can't cross the Great Water Plain for most of the story. Because it's the sea is for them completely insurmountable. And I'm interested in this sense of entrapment because it seems to me that it's a big feature of dystopian fiction that the writer kind of creates a limit for his or herself and then builds the world within that limit. So I wondered from each of you, how do you create a limit and how do you build a world within it? Should we go the opposite way?
Okay.
Let's be wild.
Crazy. Well, I mean, answering the second part first, I started writing the story, and then I realized that my world needed, I mean, perhaps because I come from a political policy perspective, I needed to create the world. So between the chapters in the book, there are extracts of the Wikipedia of the Good Hope Territory. And I found that I needed to stop writing and then go back, and I spent 4 or 5 months just writing the Wikipedia. So what occurs in the book is about 20% of the actual Wikipedia of the Good Hope Territory, which I've written, which is longer than South Africa, Spain, France, etc. Spent a lot of time on that, obsessing. But so I created this world so that I could know it before I could then go in it. And so I created everything from social policy, housing policy, culture, fun, everything, economics. And so I built the world, and then I built the limits. So, for example, people get told you can vote, we will halve your taxes if you agree to be followed by drone, or we will double your social grant if you agree to be followed by drone. Everyone agrees. Everyone gets a job if you can only vote if you have a job or a qualification. And you start building in these social sort of deals, which people start taking, and it changes the fabric of the world. So you created this control. But the last point I want to make about this is that I wrote it, and I thought, well, people will read it and go, okay, this place is crazy, it's dark, and no one would go there. But, you know, and I always do this to him, and it's probably bloody terrible. I have a brother who lives in Durban, and he's been, you know, held at gunpoint. Someone was over him and his wife's bed with a pipe hitting them on the head in the middle of the night. And he looks at this book and says, I'll go there. Yeah. And there are South Africans who are saying, when they read this book, okay, I'll take this deal. Now that freaks me out. I'm liberal, and this thing is a turmoil, but there are people who are going, and that exists in South Africa is really an interesting thing for me in terms of limits and where and what South Africans are prepared to endure.
Right. Yeah. And the kind of people who they're willing to step on in order to
Correct.
enjoy.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was interesting. I wondered if you had, because the Wikipedia pages are kind of folded inside the plot, and I wondered if you had written them all in one go, or if you were writing them as you went along. But interesting that you kind of had to make your own research so that you could write the book, which reminds me of Tanya's book.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I mean, it really is the format of most sci-fi and speculative fiction, or even fantasy, is that in order to create a coherent world, you have to think about how the world exists, from the religion to the social standing to the climate, the agriculture, because all of that affects culture and space. And for the Akashic records, it was quite easy because the conceit here was a second moon, right? So how does a second moon get in here? The limitations of astrophysics are such that there are only a really very small number of almost infinitesimally impossible. No. The astrophysicist would say not impossible, just highly improbable. But that's what I love about a great scientist, is that they're always willing to go with the what if. So that was the first kind of limitation. What happens when we get a second moon? Well, we get the three-body problem, but I don't need to worry about that for a couple of million years. What I do need to worry about is how it's going to change tides, and how it's going to change climate, and how tides and climate change farming and agriculture, and then what that means for people. So that was the first kind of environmental limit, because that informed essentially the endless water plane and where the water came from. And then there's Mitpa, which is this kind of volcanic pip that's been eroded, that they built on in the middle of this endless water plane. The preppers, the wise and vigilant preppers, to get their people there and then produce or create a world that would keep up to about 5,000 people sustained for plus minus 400 years. So it was a lot of environmental limits that are kind of premised on that, like, well, how do they poop? And how do they farm? And what crops would they grow? And where would they get their water from? And so very kind of real nuts and bolts. I found it very difficult. There was a lot of maths for my brain. But yeah, so those were the limits that were quite steadfast, and then but quite fun to work with. Yeah, so it was with that, outside in, basically.
And did you show them to your science friends and say,
I did.
is this possible?
Yeah, so I spoke to 3 astrophysicists, 2 astrophysicists in training, and then I was very lucky to get an ex-NASA guy who sat down and did a Zoom call with me. And I absolutely love them, because the probability of us getting a second moon, there needs to be like so many things in play, but they were just really willing to go with it. And I was going to go with a thing called Planet 9. I don't know if anybody knows about Planet 9.
No.
There is this space, there's a black space in our galaxy that, because of gravity and how light works, they're theorizing that it is a 9th planet, well, Planet 9, a giant mass that we will be able to see at some point. So there were those things that I learned about. And then, sorry, before I carry on, one of the things that lead us into this is a messenger, which actually happened. 2017, we spotted our first interstellar object called Oumuamua. And what I loved about it is that Oumuamua is a Hawaiian name, a Hawaiian word meaning a messenger from afar arriving first. And I was like, oh, that's the first of this giant asteroid belt that's coming. So it was really fun, to kind of fix that space and then work within that limit. Yeah.
Thank you.
So for me, it wasn't. That's a lot of. That's a lot.
It is a lot.
For me, it was basically working within my reality. Like creating the story within my reality of coming from previously disadvantaged. Kind of living in drugs, living in poverty, living with alcohol abuse, all of those, living with gender-based violence, with homophobia, all of that, the darkness within that space. And then allowing the characters to actually take my experiences and travel through the book with me. And, there wasn't a lot of thought that went into it, really. Like they did. It was that journey for me.
It was more intuitive.
It was more just writing from that experience and just allowing them to say what they want to say. As I spoke earlier about, kyk julle, Engels is nie my eerste taal nie.
Kan Afrikaans, is okay.
So, just I just needed to let that you guys know about that. With all the and that. So with the tall trees and all walking over the stream and that was part of my experience as a child. We have we have this. What is it in Engels now? Oh my word!
What's in
As
Afrikaans?
the hoe sê dit vloot.
Oh, like a.
So within all communities, they
Like a
have
krug.
like these
What are the
waterways
krugs?
that
Yes.
run through the
Canal.
community. Daar is it.
There we go, finally.
Thank you. And so drawing from those experiences, but allowing the character, allowing Carl, allowing all of them to just actually take me where they want to go. I know it sounds very cliche or superficial, whatever, but that was my experience. Yeah.
And on that note, as you say, there's a lot of darkness in the shadows, but there's also these moments of levity, like as they're walking through the big trees and the streams and stuff. There's a sort of beauty to that that's mixed in with the violence and the darkness. And I found that with all 3 of your books, this I like to call them grace notes, which is stolen from the director of The Exorcist.
Oh, there was a grace note in the director in The Exorcist?
Believe it or not, he's like, I didn't want it to be all
What?
teenage girl possessed by the devil. I wanted the nuns' robes to be floating in the breeze
and creepy silences.
Yeah,
There's beauty and darkness.
Nice moments with the mother and the daughter at the beginning of the film, and Anyway, I watched that recently, and I've been thinking about this term grace notes ever since, and I had that in my mind when I was reading your books, and which all have darkness and disturbing elements to them, trauma and grief. Tanya, I think about the Festival of Release, which sounds like a very austere, ritualistic thing that people on this island do, but they're just drinking Jack Daniels.
So Whiskey can last a very, very long time, I found, and they've been left with a giant vat of Jack Daniels, who they don't know who she is, but, or if it was like if she made it, or if she's the vat or the liquor inside, they're not sure.
Yeah. But they in this ritual, they get a little tipsy and dance around and play music and make love, and it's beautiful. In Nick's book, there's a scene that I really loved, which is after Lisa gets her life threatened, and her granny's life and her auntie's life threatened by the first minister. She goes home and drinks a glass of wine and puts on John Oliver. I thought that was hilarious. And Olivia, in your book, there's so much pain, but then that's kind of relieved by these moments of the aunties making samosas, or the girls kind of gossiping with each other. And I wondered from each of you, how important are putting in these little grace notes in your books?
So, like I said, there's beauty in darkness. Or at least, you have to find the hope. You have to find that little bit of light to actually make the darkness better. And that's how I wrote that in, is to, even though they are going through the worst things possible in life, that there is the little things that they can hold on to, which we have within our communities. Like, you go through these dark times, you go through like not having food at night, or not having electricity or whatever, but there's the little thing that actually gets you through the day, gets you on to the next, the following day, where you can start again, kind of. And even if it's darkness again, it's fine. We make a joke quickly, just like perk yourself up, lift yourself up. That's where the colorful houses and Nick and Sarah standing, watching the people go by. And then Nick is like, and you say there's nothing beautiful here, and just like you have to look, because it's there, If you look for the light within the dark, you'll experience and you'll find it. And that's what I also wanted to convey within the text.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, the point about hope is absolutely fundamental. Like any dystopian fiction with no hope, I mean, hope is humanity. It's in us. It's inherent in us. It's kind of one of the reasons I can't watch Black Mirror. I watched the first season of it, and it's kind of like torture porn. There's no hope. It's just completely black. It's completely awful. It's completely devoid of humanity. And to me, any kind of postal. But you know that there's actually a new genre coming up called apocalypse hope. Okay, so there's a move to try and find the light, to try and find the hope in things, because if you don't have those grace notes, which I love, that's an absolutely beautiful phrase, then what is the point? What is the point in it? And I think in the Akashic Records as well, we talk about apocalypse, we love apocalypse stories, we absolutely adore apocalypse stories, but we kind of headed to some sort of crash. But we will survive. That's the thing. It's just kind of like how we survive. And even in that how we survive, the fact that we survive is a little bit of hope, right? Because we get to love and have relationships, and that's so juicy. That's what makes living kind of worthwhile. And I think without it, like, what is the point of the story then?
I'm glad mine's called Good Hope then. I suppose, in my contrarian way, I've taken the lightness, or grace notes, and I've kind of had my lightness has got little bits of darkness in the lightness. Yeah. So I've spoken a lot about the context. It's actually a love story. It's a woman from Durban who falls in love with a man from Cape Town, except it's now someone coming from a whole different country into a new country that looks like the country you used to know. And when they first meet, it's like, oh, you're that guy that was on Carte Blanche talking about the new humane way of killing people with nitrogen hypoxia. Ha 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 ha. You know, and it's a light moment, but you know, we're talking about a nice new humane way to kill people. Or when they're in Cape Town on the first day, they go for a walk, and you know, Cape Town's perfect. It's pristine. There's no crime, so they walk on the pipe track on the mountain because there's no fear of attacks or anything like that. And they're walking along, and then suddenly something swoops down at them, and it's this armed drone. And ha, you know, how could I have been so scared? It's here to protect me. And so the lightness comes with the darkness. And so the levity comes with the yo. You know what I mean? So a lot of that's also, and I like to kind of fold it in. Fold it in.
Right.
In my hope.
Just make it extra dark.
Yeah, why not?
A lighter shade of dark.
Yeah, exactly.
Makes me think that this is a little bit of a digression. I'll be quick. I'm sure you know that the Cape of Good Hope was originally called the Cape of Storms.
Yeah.
And then they had to change it because it's like a propaganda campaign to get people to come down here. What a mess. Anyway, the other thing that I wanted to talk about was translation, and I want to use that term quite loosely, but I know Olivia is a little bit. This is maybe a big question for Olivia, but I'm going to ask you anyway.
No, go ahead.
So, Any Shadows was originally written in Coetzee, and you've now translated it into English. What was that experience like?
Like I said, English is not my first language, and I'm telling you, it was. I took a while. I took a while to actually get through the book. Firstly, I had to think about. It's not a South African audience. It's Canadian audience, North American audience, English audience. So you have to take that into account. One of the characters' names is called Draki in Kaapse. I don't know how many people understand Kaapse or Afrikaans. Now, Draki, directly translated, is dragon key kind of thing. And that just didn't sound right. So I changed that to Toothless. So his name in the North American translation is Toothless instead of, which is Draki now, still in the South African English translation. It was fun. I had to do it myself because I didn't want the part. I didn't want it to lose, all of the juice. That normally happens when it's being translated into, another language.
Right.
And I kind of, maybe that was just me holding on to that and wanting to go through the process with Any Shadows, from Any Shadows to still Any Shadows, but only in South Africa it's in the shadows. But in North America it's Any Shadows still.
Okay.
Yeah. But it was fun, it was difficult, it was challenging. And they helped a lot, the editors and the copywriters from their side.
Okay.
So now I know that it's fine. I don't have to speak English. I can still write in English. I can just, there's people that actually can help you through that process, of getting the book to the readers, to the audience, in a really good format, way, yeah.
And did you feel like the story kind of changed in little nuanced ways, or were you trying to say this is an audience that maybe doesn't understand Afrikaans, doesn't understand Coetzee, but they're going to get the same experiences the readers before?
So there was I think it was chapter 5, where I had to take out a big chunk of it because it just didn't sit lekker in the English that I was writing it in. And so I took that out and I sent it through to them once I was done, once I completed the whole book. And then they helped me by asking me, can we change this? Can we change that word? I don't think, North American readers will understand this. Can we change this? So they helped a lot in getting the book into a lekker shape for them to actually enjoy the book. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. And thinking about translation slightly more broadly, Tanya, I wanted to ask one of my favorite parts about the Akashic Records is the fact that Nico is writing in English, but set in a future where English is a dead language and nobody knows how to speak it anymore. So the prose is kind of unfamiliar, and he kind of uses like punctuation in very flamboyant ways, and doesn't always complete his sentences, and other little interesting things like that. And I wondered, what was that experience like, trying to mimic that style of writing or imagine it?
Yeah, it was interesting because Nico happens on sort of like 3 levels of translation, right? It's me trying to translate how a 14-year-old boy 400 years into the future, who's really considered a man, like a young man, would be kind of interpreting this oral history that he's been taught to write. And he's quite a, he's a very unreliable witness because it's all from memory, and it's now many generations on. So the records and then his sort of journal keeping, I had to keep reminding myself that there would be things that would be surprising to him that he wouldn't know. So the Moses events or Jack Daniels or the preppers, the origin of that word, I had to keep going, well, what wouldn't we know then? When I thought about the Moses event, it was like, well, obviously, but of course they wouldn't, because they don't have religion, and those stories haven't been passed on. So how would he interpret that? And then how would he interpret and write a story that it should be in secret, because if he is found, he is going to be banished, so it's not really allowed. And then how does he interpret what he hears from his peers? So there's only really one line where he kind of sort of phonetically explains how they speak. And so it was a lot of just constant, just trying to put myself in place and really get out of the way as like somebody who writes in English, to kind of see from his point of view and how other people would react to him. He's quite lonely. He's a lonely guy because he has all this information that he shouldn't have. So it was tricky, but it was fun because once you get out the way, right? Like, it's okay. Then you can just go edit. I mean, whether your first language or second language, everything happens in the editing all the time. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was exciting. I got to say things that I wouldn't normally be able to say. None of my characters would be like, wow, I found the word for vagina. Vagina, vagina, vagina. So yeah, it was fun. I just had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, fun to read too.
Oh, I'm glad. Yeah, many people were very kind of thrown off with the sort of way that it's textually laid out, but that's how he speaks, so that was good.
And Nick, I want to ask you about translation, very loosely defined. I know that you have a history in politics. You were an MP formerly, and you've been a political advisor. And certainly Good Hope wouldn't exist without some pretty detailed knowledge of that field. So I wonder how it was translating your knowledge and experience to fiction.
Yeah. See, the problem with, you mentioned politics and being a politician, people kind of immediately go, oh, that kind of person. And it's like having a disease, which is what politics really is. And really what I wanted to find a way. I mean, politics is obviously important, and there's great political stories in Scandinavia, the UK, and America that really touch people in a way that they can access and get involved in the story and have an emotional connection to it. And so South Africa, you say, well, I got a political story for you, and it's like, oh, it's going to be mucky,
it's
and
cringy.
State capture and like really cringy, or it's going to be supercilious, or it's going to be, and there's no way to access politics as storytellers. And I found that, being the politician, I thought I'd have a swing at it. And what I really wanted to do was, and to use a terrible political term, to sex it up, to take politics and to turn it into like a rollicking thriller, and to actually have a South African angst, South African fear, but something that we can be kind of cool about, like a really fun South African political thriller. So I try to translate like that, to kind of, I'm not going to say make politics cool again, because that's trite, but you know what I mean, that kind of thing.
And was politics ever cool?
No.
And did anybody get upset at you?
Cape Exit.
Maybe you don't want to say publicly.
Cape Exit followed me when the book came out, and then unfollowed me when they read it. So I think they got the
That's a
message.
thumbs up.
Yeah.
They thought you were one of them.
They thought, oh, he has a book about Cape Independence. Oh, hold on. They read it. Maybe it's not.
Oh, come on.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. I've got one more question, and then I'll open it up to you guys. Tanya, in your book, you have this very interesting conceit that we've mentioned, whereby the last people are very suspicious of stories, and they say that it is the recklessness of stories that trapped the ancients, that's us, and brought upon them the time of cataclysms. Thus we do not write or speak of anything that is not, so that we do not bring upon ourselves that which might be, as the ancients did. So kind of taking this as a prompt, I wonder what each of you think. Is there a risk to imagining dystopia, or is there hope in it?
So I had a discussion with fellow writers. We were on a, what you call this?
Panel.
Residency.
Yeah. And we were talking about how we as writers kind of, create, okay, this is going to sound very whack now, but we kind of create reality because, media, films, movies, books, we write, we read, we watch, we listen to these stories as everyone, as people in general. And we kind of create, I don't know, this just sounds wrong, but we create these realities. So and this is now after I wrote Any Shadows, and I thought to myself, and I've been thinking about this, like, with the extreme of this book, taking it to the extreme of darkness, like, why would I do that as a writer? Why would I every time go and write these dark things, write dystopia, whatever? And, I asked self, and self was like, we have to write through these darknesses. We have to get to the out on the other side. We need to get through it to actually have a world where space like Cape Exit, that something like that doesn't exist but not just only South Africa, but in the world. I mean, like, we are going towards the end of something, and if we don't find a place where we come together, and for me, writing through it, that's what we must do. And so, yeah, writing through it, making movies through it, because if you look at the what's being shown now, the movies, like the darkness within the movies itself, like that's there. It's just it's worse than Black Mirror.
Yeah.
There's nothing fun. There's no hope, kinda. So yeah.
Yeah, I think, stories are just one great projection of the human psyche. And stories, I think, do absolutely interpret how life plays out on bigger scales and smaller scales. PR, Instagram, that's all stories. Advertising is stories. And then you've got, speculative fiction writers especially who do a lot of what if. Your cell phone, your laptop, your iPad, your watch, everything was a sci-fi writer sometime who had thought it out, and some tech bro had read it and thought, well, that seems like a really good idea. Let me see if I can do that. Like, literally, you can go, you just Google it. You'll just see the amounts of tech gadgets that you have today that actually comes from a story. So yeah, I agree. I actually, Henrietta Rose Ennis wrote a book called Nineveh a while back, and I remember a few months after it was published, she was like, I made up this bug. Like, I made it up, and they actually found it. So so I think sometimes that story is both like channeling kind of like the human psyche and what it needs to work through, what it needs to sublimate, and then where it's going to go. And I mean, that is where a lot of Nico's story fear comes from, is because sometimes when I watch something, some new fantastic horror that a story writer has thought up. I'm like, oh my God, will you please just not write that? Don't do that. Don't put ideas into crazy people's heads. You know, so yeah, I think it is, you know, art, life, art.
I agree with what you both said. You know, when I used to work as a spin doctor, they call it, at one point, and there was a saying that everyone used to say, is, reality is not reality, perception is reality. Now, that is dystopia, because there are people who run this world on the basis of things like perception is reality. So, you know, you can write dystopian things, etc. What the governments and politicians of this world are doing, they are doing much worse than we could ever think about. You know, what's happening in North Korea, what's happening in countries, I mean, we can get into all sorts of places, territories, etc., where things are going down. And that is hell on earth. And, you know, so, you know, you write about it and people go, oh, it's dystopia. The world is dystopia. And now the question is, what do we do about it? How do we respond? How do we respond as a reader, emotionally, intellectually? How do we, you know, how do we do things? It's, you know, and maybe just that despair of not being able to is something which we also need to be able to communicate. It's like, the world is burning and at least I'm acknowledging it, you know, because sometimes the despair is just too much.
Like, for instance, just Rose was raped by her father, and then, you know, those things happen within our families, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, you know, taking it to the extreme, I think it is part of the responsibility as a creator of stories to actually, you know, write these stories, but also to just take it there to put it in our faces, to say, like, is this really the world that we want to live in, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think Colin Coben, can I just make, 'cause it's such a good point you were making, it's about sublimation. One of the thriller writers said, the reason people read thrillers, because I used to be like, oh, thrillers, dead people. And he said the reason people read thrillers is because there's justice at the end. You know, one of the formats of the genre is that, like, a terrible thing happens, there is a bad guy, we know who the bad guy is, and then there is justice that finds the bad guy, and the bad guy, you know, gets his comeuppance. And that's why people read it, because there is a solid bad guy, there is a resolution, and the bad guy is caught. Yeah, I think that's the sublimation part of stories is huge. But so is the creation. Watch what you say.
And balancing facing the truth squarely in the face, and also facing the truth of beauty and trying to love each other, and despite all of the darkness in the world on fire.
I mean, if you can find, like, glimmer or hope glimmers in The Exorcist, I mean, my God.
I have no concept of how much time has passed.
9 minutes left.
Sorry? Oh, great. I'd like to take a few questions. I see Cameron has his hand up. But we need to wait for the microphone. It is very important.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Keely.
Thank
That was
you.
wonderful talk. Keely and I have known each other for like 8 years now. Anyway, one of the weirdly most comforting, like, sayings for me is Jan Smuts, the former Prime Minister of South Africa, said, the worst, like the best, seldom ever happens.
Oh my God, this is
And
in Nick's
It's
book.
literally in my
Really?
book.
I didn't know. That's amazing. Makes sense, though. But also, like, there's a great book about the First World War called The Sleepwalkers, saying that essentially, like, how do we understand, like, we don't understand the world wars and things have already happened, were the worst things imaginable when they happened. And they weren't even imaginable. They were beyond anything anyone could have imagined at the time. And yet we just wandered straight into them. And they happened, and we kind of invent conspiracy theories for how they happened, but actually the reality is we just sleepwalked into them. And I wonder how much is, like, writing dystopian fiction almost like a protection spell, saying, like, you know, let's not sleepwalk into this. It can happen if we're able to name it. You know, so speaking to what Nick was saying, but how much do you feel like that when you write?
I mean, for me, I certainly, because I'm, you know, I suppose in a way I write with an agenda, in the sense that I look at some of the problems of the country and I want to bake that into my story and to kind of scream and shout and campaign about it, but still write a captivating story that takes you on a journey. So yeah, for me, 100%.
Are you saying like stories like a giant red flag, like do not go here?
Yeah. No, I'm saying that often the worst happens because we can't imagine it.
By
So
saying
we're trying
it
to
comes
imagine
alive.
to prevent the worst from happening.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Yeah. I actually read this fantastic little short by Borges the other day, and I think it's Death in the Compass. And there's one little bit where the character believes that if he can think of not Death in the Compass, a different one. But the character believes that he can prevent his death, his manner of dying, if he can think of every conceivable way of dying. He's going to get shot, so he just thinks about the worst possible way he could die, every kind of variation of how he's going to get shot. And of course, he gets shot anyway, but he does it because he thinks it's like a weird spell against it.
Yeah.
And I get that as well, but yeah, no, don't do that for writing.
I just think that that's, it's just, we have to go through it. We have to go through the red flags. That's just what it is. And so me writing is not about, I need to put this in your face and please change, please, because it's not going to happen. If you tell a child not to put his finger, I'm not equating adults to children, but don't put your finger into a plug. They're going to do that. So we just, as humanity, maybe we are children, as humanity as a whole. And so we have to go through this process of destroying each other, because that's what we're doing. We're looking at, no, let's not go there. So yeah, that's just writing through it, yeah. There was behind you.
You guys said world building first, then you put in limits, and then you mentioned everything happens in editing. What would your process be from start to finish? How many times do you actually rewrite a draft, or was it kind of okay the first time, second time?
I'm friends with Al Mackay, who's written 2 novels, and I bumped into him. He'd finished his first novel, and I said, I've written this draft. It's finished, so obviously it's going to be printed next week or next month. And he said to me, he says, you're about 40% of the way through. And I thought to myself when he said it, I know he said that, but it just can't be true. Well, let me tell you, it was more than true. Yeah. It was, the way I explained it to people was you create a tapestry, a beautiful, rich tapestry with colors and woven things, and then the editor says, I love it. I love the picture, I love the texture, but see that red and green and orange? Pull that out. Pull that out, but make it still have the same texture and feeling and everything else. I'm saying this in the room with one of my editors literally in the room watching me as I say it. And but that's the relationship you have, is being able to have the tapestry look and feel and still rip out all those chords. It's crazy. It was a crazy period.
Yeah, Terry Pratchett says that the first draft is just you telling the story to yourself. So for me, it's like I just kind of and then my way through an entire book. This has to happen and that has to happen and they're going to have this conversation. And then it's about, 10, 12, 15, 13 edits over that. And then it goes to an editor. So like it's a lot. Yeah. And yourself? I mean, you said a lot of people.
Yeah, the
editors, the proofreaders.
Yeah. Now with the Cubs version, I had one editor and one proofreader. Now I have with the English translation, there was a whole team, of going through different levels of proofreading the book and editing and stuff like that. Amazing. So, and also with the whole translation, it's a lot of work. That first, like she said, the first draft I wrote in 3 weeks. So it was like, I was like, this is good.
That's a good
first time. And then I got to my supervisor and she's like, no. you can't write in English. Please just go and write in your own language kind of thing. So I had to rewrite it. And then again, there was like, still filling in the holes. And still reading it now, there's still, I can still fill in some holes kind of thing. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, I think Stephen King says he never finishes writing a book. He can always pick a book whenever and just keep editing and keep writing and keep changing.
Yeah. We might have time for one more.
Please.
This is kind of like a deep question-ish, but as authors, as creators of stories, you have gone through certain experiences in your life where it's very hard to kind of go through some sort of cathartic release for you to, in a sense, release the pain that you've gone through throughout your life. So I think I'm going to refer to this Carl Jung quote that I read, not word for word, but it's kind of like, we can't experience the highest forms of heaven if we don't go through the deepest roots of hell. So how have you used your stories to explore the deepest roots of hell, but also allow the reader or the viewer to also experience the light and the cathartic release that you might have gone through as authors to, in a sense, have some sort of perception of growth or life or release or happiness or joy or something, you know, along those lines of how to further develop their characters in their own stories of their lives. Yeah.
Thank you.
So because of the stories that I write, I had a very difficult first few years of my life, and it took a lot of therapy and a lot of, a lot of stuff to get over that. So I actually tend to not try, and that's why I write just stories about other people. So the stories, the fact that I'm able to write the story and draw on my experience and place that into characters is proof that I've come through what I've come through. But I tend to not, I kind of keep it separate. I don't actually, I think, in characters it'll come out. I know what my next few books are going to be, and I know how my past experience is going to come through that. But it's a very kind of intimate, personal knowledge that I don't want my readers to know about necessarily. That's my experience.
Yeah, for me, being a survivor of rape, I'm not writing rape in that way. The one rape scene was spoken about. One of the characters speak about it, but they don't go through it because even being a survivor, that is just still something that I'm not gonna, obvious, opposite look.
Yeah, obvious, good.
Be obvious about writing about that kind of thing. But like you said, it does come through.
Yeah, it does.
Even subconscious, unsubconsciously, it comes through. Through the characters, that you're going to write about that darkness to actually find, that hope and that light at the end of the tunnel, kind of thing.
Yeah, you use it like a tool. It becomes part of your tool set.
But I actually found that my answer relates back to the previous question about editing, because I found that I basically almost endowed a lot of my characters with a lot of my psychological issues, all of them. And then the editor kind of finds the things that make sense. This one works here, and you can use a bit of this, but let's get rid of that because that's just too much and messy. No one wants to know that. And, and takes them, and so if you can, almost like my Wikipedia, when I filled it up, I created volume, and then you could whittle away the volume to the thing that becomes important and special for that character. But I did throw it all at it at the beginning, and then the editing process allowed a lot of my psychoanalysis and psychological problems to be kind of, thank goodness for you, to be sort of whittled away.
Yeah, the author mustn't come through in the story. Like, they mustn't read the author. The characters must come through, and they can have elements of the author. But
yeah, exactly.
They always do.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. I think I haven't developed an idea for this. I was hoping that I would come up with something in the past hour, but I didn't. So let's just raise hands. Anybody who wants Olivia's book? And then we're going to... oh, God, there's a lot of people.
He was the first one up. I got his.
Okay, first one up.
That was him.
Nick gets the book.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, so much for being here. Thank you, Olivia, Nick, and
Thank
Tanya.
you, Keely.
That was really special.
Thank you.
Enjoy the festival, everyone, and buy lots of books and have fun.
Yeah.
Thank you.